Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Program's webinar and broadcast podcast. My name is Dr. Brad Reedy, and today's format is a format where we take live questions. We can always take questions if you're listening and you want to send in questions, comments, suggestions. You can send them to webinar@evoketherapy.com, and we'll put those in the queue. And on these forums, we'll answer those first. A lot of times we get into a theme with it. So when the podcast comes out, I usually pick one of the themes that sticks out to me as the title, and then in parentheses, I put question and answer. So before I get into tonight's pre-submitted questions, I just want to talk a little bit about wilderness therapy. Those that are listening live, I'm sure know exactly what I'm talking about, but those that might be listening to the podcast, Evoke Therapy Program's history, our roots are in wilderness therapy. It's an outdoor setting. It's a delivery method with small group, nomadic, primitive living groups, adolescents. And in the context of that, everything becomes grist for the mill. The relationships, the problem solving, the frustration tolerance, the delay of gratification rises to the surface. And one of the things we know about everybody, and especially children, is that the language that they speak is experiential, is through their bodies. That's why the recommended therapy for children is not talk therapy, it's play therapy. Of course, as somebody matures through adolescence, more and more talk therapy can be effective for them. But it's in that setting. It's the same setting that NASA uses, the same process, the same method that NASA uses when its teams haven't worked together to build trust and relationships. They find that classrooms and contrived exercises don't quite accomplish it. And I just want to share two quotes that I love when thinking about the therapeutic aspect of nature. Andy Goldsworthy said, "We often forget that we are nature. Nature is not something separate from us. So when we say that we have lost our connection to nature, we have lost our connection to ourselves." And Joseph Campbell wrote, "The goal of life is to make your heartbeat match the beat of the universe, to match your nature with a capital N." So this idea of, we use traditional therapies, but doing it in the wilderness, I've never seen anything more powerful, more effective in my life at treating young people, both with mental health issues and also with addiction. So just wanted to mention that. So now I'm ready to get started with the pre-submitted questions. We have a handful of them to start with. Those that are watching live, you can submit those at any time. Kirk, who's moderating for me this evening, will store those in the queue, and we'll get to those in the order that we receive them. The first pre-submitted question I have goes like this. Dr. Reedy, thank you for all your podcasts and the support that you have given to all of us. My second son took his own life in 2016, aged 19. And subsequently, my third son attended Evoke in Utah 18 months later, aged 18. Wilderness therapy was transformational. However, the impact and isolation of COVID has been difficult for all of us, and him in particular. Our three youngest children came home during isolation, and it was extremely difficult for all of them. Motivation ebbed away. He has been hit backwards by exams and the end of an important relationship, and currently spends most of his time in his bedroom reading. He has a good relationship with his youngest brother, but he has become isolated from his two older siblings and school friends and has become anxious in public places. He has lost all of that magnificent confidence that he possessed before our lives changed. As parents, we know that living at home with us is not ideal for him in the long term, and although he wants to help, as he has stated, he has not been seeing a therapist for the past 8 months. He is ambivalent about the situation, and we are at a loss about how to support him. I am seeing my therapist every week, which is helpful, as I am neurodiverse, as is he, and my partner listens to your podcast and does their work. After all that background, my question is suggestions on how to support him and help him rebuild his confidence. P.S. I thought equine therapy was superb, but unfortunately, there are few practitioners. First of all, I want to say that I'm extraordinarily sorry for your loss and the weight that you carry. After saying that, I want to talk about your question and your context, your background. You're not alone, as you know. The entire world suffered in some ways very similar to the way that you and your child has suffered with COVID and with the isolation. And not only that, but there was an increase in social media time and screen time and accessing. I was just talking to a client recently about this idea that we have to be very careful for the news that we consume. We're caught between wanting to stay well informed and the fact that our nervous systems aren't built to take in all of the trauma in all of the world all of the time. Really, essentially, our nervous systems were built to take in our village, right? Our tribe, our small group. And now that social media, not just mainstream media, but now that social media is dumping trauma on people of all ages. See, children in the past, they didn't have this kind of news shared with them all the time. They weren't watching mainstream news. They weren't watching the news at night. Their parents might have been, but they weren't. But now we're being bombarded by social injustices, by cruelty, by wars, by famine, by acts of God, like the recent earthquake that happened in the Middle East, and we're not equipped. We can't. Even though we're capable of consuming all of that information, our nervous systems don't do well. So that's just to normalize the process. I think what I would say, I had I have a client that I've worked with for many, many years in the context of his children, especially his daughter, who struggled with mental health issues. And recently he shared with me that she's gone through some personal tragedies in her life and that she's stuck isolating, not going out with friends, spending a lot of time on the computer and not out of this depression and anxiety. And the father reached out to me to ask about his daughter, saying, I want to support her. You know, in the past, I've talked to her. We've had the discussion about drawing a line. And as this parent shared their story and gave me their background, not too dissimilar from yours in terms of the current state of affairs for her daughter, he said to me, what I realized was I just have to help her through the discussion by regulating my own nervous system. I read a quote last night that said, wouldn't it be great if we understood that the greatest love that we can offer our family members is to learn to regulate our own nervous system? And so he offered to me, before I even offered any ideas on a solution, he said, I think what you're going to tell me is that I have to not be concerned about the behavior, about the isolation, about the shutting down, the same kinds of things that you're describing, but I have to have a dialogue and be in discussion with her about where she's at emotionally. And it's got to be a slow ramp up for her. He's gone through in the past years of setting these firms line, these lines in the sand, and almost using financial support and living at home in a way, using it as leverage. But I was really happy to hear that he'd evolved to embrace a more nuanced discussion. So my answer to you is there's no shortcut and there's no quick solution. And what I would say further is I don't even think there needs to be a shortcut and a quick solution. I think it's a relationship and a dialogue. You want to be a resource to your child. You want to be a support. So I would invite you, encourage you to take out of your mind everything that you've been taught, everything our culture teaches us about expectations and timelines, and try to stay in relationship to her. Make sure, like you're saying, that you and your wife are going to therapy. Make sure that your child knows, I think it's your son knows that therapy is available to him. But don't continue to press for that. Don't continue to suggest it over and over again if you've already suggested it and knows that he's available. But the shift is from trying to get him to be fixed, to change, to improve, to building and staying in connected relationship with him. Yes, there eventually might be a point at which you say, I'm not comfortable with the way things are going. And you can have that discussion over time, gradually, with your child. But the focused shift, the shift in focus for all of our children, according to what we talk about at Evoke, what we know about attachment, the shift is from not focusing on the behaviors, either the bad behaviors that they might be exhibiting, like self-medicating, self-harming, acting out behaviors, or the absence of positive behaviors like socializing and working or going to school, to shift our focus from symptoms to what's beneath it. And then staying in dialogue with your child where you can become a resource to them. And my thought today, not the same thought I had 10 years ago, by the way. And I've been doing this for 24, 25, 26 years, 27 years. My shift is from s- fewer ultimatums, fewer drawing line on the sand, fewer suggestions around leverage. You keep those in your back pocket. And yes, you have the right as a parent to draw any line inside of your house that you feel comfortable with. I fully and wholly support you. But I think it's about relationship and connection. I think it's about seeing if you can be, the way I think about it is, can you be a ramp, a subtle ramp up to her getting help outside of the home with a therapist by the way you by by the way you negotiate the relationship, and where I keep saying she, where he's at. Those are my thoughts. And I know that doesn't give you direct marching orders, but maybe part of what I'm inviting you to think of is, it might not be as dire. It might not be as time sensitive as you think. This might take longer. I've said recently that the greatest barrier to people making progress in psychotherapy is the pace. And I say to parents all the time, when they're grappling with a big decision, what they consider a big decision, I'll often say to them, this won't matter. This is a longer arc, if you will. It will require more patience than probably you've been accustomed to practicing. Make sure you're doing your therapy. Make sure your nervous system is being attended to. Make sure your issues have a place. Make sure your frustration, your disappointment, your fear. And as a parent who's lost a child to suicide, which of course on a personal level, I can't quite imagine. I can only imagine, I guess I should say. I can't quite relate to perfectly because I've not had that experience. I can only imagine it. And I can only imagine how much weight and intensity this adds to any issue with any of your other children. So for the most part, my thought is, try to figure out how to lower the emotional temperature, both by doing your work and by normalizing things, and by telling you that, and I really believe this. This has been a belief of mine for many, many years. It's essential teaching in the Journey of the Heroic Parent, my first book. The decisions, the specific decisions aren't the thing. It's how we are with ourselves, with the world, with the people that we love, and our children. And sometimes when parents are making what I might even consider possibly a bad decision when they're grappling with something big, like I've mentioned, I'll often say, try it, see how it works. I talked to somebody just recently where some counsel they came to me at an intensive for with a child several months ago, a year ago. And they went home and took a very um, limited approach, I guess I would say. They didn't initiate big changes in their family, which is fine. And when I consulted with them this week, the message was, they're ready now. And so part of it also in families, because we get so caught up in what's the right thing and what do the experts say and what might Brad say, if that even comes to mind, or any other podcaster or self-help author or psychologist or therapist you might be seeing. We get so, I think, bombarded with the ideas that there's a right way and a quick solution, um, that we put pressure on ourselves. And the child feels that pressure. That adds to what they're already struggling with. So I think it's not as dire as you think. Slow it down, stay in a relationship, shift your focus from right and good behaviors to just being in relationship and being a resource. My wife might listen to this later, but I'm going to confess to something that I did today that she might be frustrated if she hears this later. But yesterday, my 15-year-old, my wife wakes her up in the morning and I drive her to school every morning. And she fell back asleep. after my wife woke her up, and that doesn't happen very often. In fact, it infrequently happens with her. And it caused a little glitch in our morning routine, and we had to adjust some things. And then come this morning, my wife woke her up, and 30 minutes later, when I was getting up to get ready to take her to school, my wife said, "You might want to remind her and check and make sure that she's awake." Because I wake up about 20 minutes before we have to leave. And I just nodded at my wife and walked in the next room. And I thought, I'm not going to, for a couple of reasons. One is she doesn't do it a lot. And I want her to figure it out. Yesterday when she was late, she was very apologetic to me. And I said, it happens. And then this morning, I didn't want to. I didn't want to take my anxiety about it happening again, or my wife's for that matter, and put that on her shoulders. Does that make sense? And why my example is significantly more trivial than the things that you've dealt with and the things that you're dealing with now. It is a principle of my goal again. Our goal, I think it is to raise children that are ourselves, that are human, rather than raising children that become good citizens, good workers, good students. But that we like I said, we attend to our own nervous system, our own traumas, both recent traumas and childhood traumas, our own triggers, so that when we're in relationship, in dialogue, making decisions about our children, our needs are taken care of somewhere else. Does that make sense? Being a parent who can provide a secure attachment means you have to take care of your needs in other places, not with the child. To be a good listener, I wrote today on social media. Actually, it's going to come out tomorrow on social media. To be a good listener, or in clinical terms, an adequate container. That's the clinical term for being a really good listener, being attuned to the child. To develop and practice attunement with the child, to be a deep listener, to be an adequate container. You have to take care of your traumas and your needs in other places. Because if you don't, there will be a conflict in relationship to your child. You'll be trying to get your needs met in relationship to the child, and it will come out unconsciously. And the child will feel responsible, guilty, angry, anxious, or depressed because they can't carry your life. They can't be responsible for your peace, for your serenity, for your well being, for your self esteem. So it's a very long answer to what I can imagine is, in the context that you lived, a very difficult and challenging question. Thank you for sharing it with us. Somebody writes, when you say you don't believe in therapy for children, how do you handle a child that is struggling with mental health? Okay. I saw this question come up at the end of the last one. To clarify, I don't that's not what I said or believe. I think therapy can be helpful for children. Let me restate my position. And I referred to some of the principles at the outset of this broadcast. Young children, pre-adolescent children, um, uh, the mode that I prefer, the mode that works developmentally, is play therapy. The language of children is play. They don't have the prefrontal cortex. They don't process things verbally, rationally, logically like adult brains do. So activities are more effective. That's one of the reasons why wilderness therapy can be so powerful, because it's activity based. It's experientially based, right? As adolescents mature, they can be helped and engaged more and more with talk therapy. What I said in the broadcast was, I have come to the point where I don't like the idea of forcing adolescents, or maybe even younger children, to go to individual therapy if they're resistant or they don't want to. Outpatient specifically, not programs like Evoke, where you're at the point where you're worried for their safety and you're trying everything. You've offered therapy, they're not willing, they're not a part of the solution. That's why something like Evoke exists, right? So very specifically, to restate, experiential and play therapy for children can be more effective. Talk therapy can be very effective for adolescents. to force adolescents to go to individual therapy when we see their distress and mental illness, I'm reluctant. That's all. I'm reluctant to draw that line. To come to family therapy, that's a different story. Then it's come to family therapy because I need help, right? We need help. But again, if you've offered, if you've required family therapy and they're still resistant, you tried everything, that's where programs like Evoke that are parent choice programs become justifiable, right? It makes sense because we have the responsibility, we bear the burden of taking care of the child if they don't want to take care of themselves. So just to be more specific and kind of smooth out the nuances of what I've said, it's outpatient. It's forcing adolescents to go to individual outpatient therapy that I said I've come to have very little faith in that particular track of thinking. So I hope that clarifies things. Somebody writes, I'm interested in going to the Finding Connection workshop, but I'm nervous. Sorry. Let me just make sure that we're all set up correctly here. I'm interested in going to the Finding Connection workshop. The one we just had over the weekend was a Finding Connection workshop with 4 couples. But I'm nervous about sharing intimate pieces in front of other couples. Curious about the difference between the workshop and a private program. We talked about this at the Finding Connection workshop. I was amazed at many things. Of course, the individual experiences and growth of each individual and each couple was an honor to be a witness to hold space for. But one of the things that several of the couples said, in fact, while everybody didn't necessarily verbalize this, when several people were making this comment, everybody else seemed to be nodding and in agreement. And I was surprised and didn't see it coming. They had some trepidation coming in, just like you do in your question, about the difference between private and group couples work, multi-couple work. Feeling like it might feel too exposing, too vulnerable to share in front of what they would think to be strangers. But 2 things happened. Those strangers became not strangers very quick. The kind of sharing and courage that goes on from really the very first therapeutic activity is profound. Really, if you haven't done it, it's probably unimaginable. I remember similar kind of question. I had a very close friend and colleague, go to the same workshop that I was going to 13 years ago. And we found out about it a day or 2 before we were to arrive. A mutual friend of each of ours told both of us that we were both going. And we connected on it. And the only request that we made is that we weren't in the same small group, because they had several groups, that we'd be in different process groups. That was our request. But after the first day, when we met during one of our breaks in the large lectures, we both noted that we had wished we were in the small groups, because after a while, once you see everybody's underbelly and you share your underbelly, so to speak, you realize everybody's more alike than they are different. I've been to 6 or 7 professional intensives myself with colleagues in the field where I practice. Same group of men. It's the same experience. We don't trust each other less after seeing our pieces of work where very vulnerable things are shared, including mistakes and bad choices that we've all made. We trust each other more. In essence, I trust those men more than other professionals who aren't doing their work. And these couples said the same. They said that. That they got close and they trusted each other really, really quickly. What they thought was going to be uncomfortable. But here's the nugget that I didn't anticipate. They said they think it's easier. They thought it was easier to do the multi-couples intensives in some ways, because they could say something to their spouse or about their spouse, and they knew that somebody would hear it. Somebody would relate to it. Even if their spouse might be triggered or shut down or reactive to something they shared, they knew that others in the group we're going to be holding, compassionate, non-judgmental space for them. And the second half of the intensive, we have an opportunity for everybody to do a 1 hour couple session after all of the family of origin work and all the stuff leading up to it. Everybody has the opportunity to do what we call a fishbowl session, where everybody else is sitting around and I'm engaging in a couple session, a traditional couple session. And I give the choice, of course, that if you want to have it privately, you're welcome to. Every couple chose to have it in front of the group because of exactly what I'm saying. So that question, I think, is a concern that many people would have. But the thing I can tell you is there'll be people that'll be different in the group. There'll be people that are more advanced and less advanced. There'll be people with more trauma and less trauma than you, more acute symptoms and less acute symptoms than you. That will be true. But really, once people get into the work, everybody's about the same. Everybody's stuff is more similar than it is different. And that statement was said at this in couples intensive, I don't know how many times, dozens of times. Dozens of times people were able to remark about how similar they saw themselves and in other people's and other couples' work, even though some of the specifics, the content varied from person to person, couple to couple. So thank you. Somebody writes, grateful but struggling with the concept following my finding you intensive. Do you have any resources, article, blog posts to address the correlation between attachment wounds and childhood mental relational health? On a healthy thinking day, I can accept that my part in attachment of trauma, of course, contributed to my child's struggle. However, on a shameful day, it is very difficult not to get stuck in shame. I want to understand in a nutshell Brad Reedy's philosophy to help my family in thinking and recovery. Well, I don't know this. I don't know who wrote this, but what I will say is, of course, the first two places to go are The Journey of the Rogue Parent and The Audacity to Be, the two books that I've read, if you want to know my philosophy. You can also look for the article that my wife and I co-authored for the NatSap Journal called Psychology versus Therapy. If you Google psychology versus therapy, Brad Reedy, you'll find the article. It'll come up. In fact, Kirk, you can submit the link in the chat here if people want to, if the person who submitted the question happens to be listening tonight. So that's the first thing. I think anything by James Hollis I would recommend. The book by Bruce Perry that said, and Oprah Winfrey, What Happened to Us, is What Happened to You is a very recent book that I think talks about this connection. One of my favorite books on attachment theory and parenting is Parenting from the Inside Out by Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell. And of course, The Drama of the Gifted Child, to me and to many, is the most important book on parenting and child development. Let me make this statement, this caveat with all those books that I just shared with you that I think answer your question. And of course, listening to all these podcasts, this is what I'm trying to do. I have two things to say. Number one, pace is a barrier. When you said on a healthy day, on a day when you're struggling, you have a very different reaction to things. That's normal. That's me too. That's typical. Healing and growth is not this straight linear line of any, right? It's not of any kind of diagonal. It's messy, it's fuzzy, it's two steps forward and 3 back, 5 forward and 1 back, 1 to the side, 1 to the other side, 2 back, 3 forward. It's like that. So much of what causes us problems individually and in relationships is this idea that it can be easy and we can be good and we can heal with a few hacks and a few steps. I'm incredibly averse to focusing on tools for this very reason. That if you master the tools, you'll heal. Tools can be helpful. They can teach us. Like I wrote in The Audacity to Be You in the chapter on the 8 tools that I talk about. They can assist us. They can inspire us. I shared the quote that I remember from my 10th grade English class right before I dropped out of high school that said that if thought can corrupt our language, then language can corrupt our thought, meaning that sometimes we learn from the inside out and sometimes we can learn from the outside in. So tools can be helpful. I'm not throwing them all away, but the emphasis is on a sensibility, a way of being, and a healing. And it takes a long, long time. And part of my work, folks, and I get this a lot. I don't think I did a very good job of it earlier on, and I hope I'm doing a better job of it now, is as an expert in the area of mental health and families, parenting, coupleship, trauma, healing therapy, and so forth. As an expert in those areas, I struggle too. And if I think I'm not supposed to struggle or I'm supposed to be beyond it, that's when the defense comes up, right? And the defense is both the solution and the problem. It's all about defenses and shame. That's all it is. If you could imagine for a moment that shame were to disappear, if you could imagine that as a thought experiment, all that we would need is just some teaching. Our mistakes would only come from ignorance at that point. But shame is the thing that we treat in psychotherapy. You know, it's not the thing that we treat so we can get to the real issue. The defense or the resistance is not the thing that we get past so that we can get to the real issue. Those are the issues. So the shame that you're describing, rearing its head again on a not so great day of yours, that's the work. That's the work. And my the offer I want to make to you specifically and to all that you are listening is I'm with you. And all those therapists out there, I don't care who they are, I don't care how smart they are, they would, if given truth serum, tell you the same thing. They might not do it as much as I do because I don't think they're in relationship to their audience as much as I am in this format. And I've learned the hard way that just teaching the quote unquote right things to do and the healthy things to do is not only not helpful, but sometimes it's more of a problem. I want you to feel not alone. I want you to know that, yeah, I have a pretty good academic intellectual understanding of the concepts that I teach for sure. I have a doctorate degree in this subject and I read and I study. That's true. But my life, the work is very, very human. Gandhi had a problem with his temper and anger. He wasn't nice to his wife, not just once or twice. It's something he struggled with that he confessed to. As I said to the group that I just ran the intensive for, the wiser and more evolved you are, the more you talk about your fallibility. The less evolved you are, the more you talk about how good you are doing. And I know that's just an idea, but there's a truth in that. Can you hear it? The enlightened people talk about their buffoonery on a regular basis. More fragile people who still have a very, very strong ego and a protection to a need to be good. So they have defenses and protections up. Defenses and protections are synonymous with mental health, mental illness symptoms. That's what they are. The more fragile folks, they're less able, less apt to talk about their buffoonery, their idiocy, their mistakes. So you and I are the same. And those are something else. Oh, one other author, James Hollis, Brad Reedy, Daniel Siegel and Mary Hartzell, Alice Miller in The Drama of the Gifted Child. I didn't mention J.D. Gill. Anything by J.D. Gill. She's written about 40 books. She happens to be my therapist, and I am thankful that I stumbled across her in a supervision session 25 years ago when I was working for a clinic that treated sex offenders. And she came in once a week for supervision, and I thought, she's talking about something different than everybody else. And I later then hired her as my therapist and have been seeing her for 24 years, my wife for 25. So thank you for the question. Somebody says, I'm still struggling to understand. Oh, by the way, this is out of order. But Also, I would say go to the blog, the Evoke blog, my personal website, drbradreedy.com. There are blogs there too. You can have readings there. Somebody writes, I'm still struggling to understand the difference between setting a boundary desired and expecting the child to behave in a way that soothes my emotions, not desired. You say that a boundary is not about changing someone else's behavior, right? However, for example, if I set a boundary to my teenager by defining a curfew or stating that I'm not okay with drugs in the house or for friends to sleep over, this is my boundary. But isn't it also an effort to control his behavior? Let's say I want him to be home by midnight so I can sleep better knowing he's safe. Is this a healthy boundary or is the implication that he needs to take care of me? And you say that boundaries are not for him, but really these boundaries, in fact, are meant to keep him safe. I also want to add that I came across your work by chance only a couple of weeks ago and have been devouring your books and podcasts since. Your wisdom, humility, and clarity are unparalleled, and I want to thank you for this from the bottom of my heart. Our adopted son is 18 now and has been to 2 wilderness programs, a treatment center, a therapeutic boarding school since he was 15. He is now in a boarding school in Vermont and doing quite well. Nevertheless, it has been and continues to be an incredibly challenging journey, and I so wish I had found you years ago. I'm getting the audacity to be you for each of my 2 older adult children and want to offer my 25-year-old daughter, whom I have dented unnecessarily, to participate in a Finding You session. I myself have signed up for a session at Onsite in Tennessee later this month. This was before I learned about Finding You, and I gather from your writing that this might be where your wife and yourself went to all those years ago and continue to go. And once again, thank you, thank you, thank you. You have been my constant companion for the last 3 weeks and my source of so much hope as I have deeply been feeling the grief of having created a dysfunctional family system. Kirk, don't submit the new question for a minute because there's so much here. I'm going to need to reference this for a minute. I'll give you a little thumbs up sign when I'm ready for the new question because I want to keep this one up here. Let's talk about the boundary issue first. Again, it's nuanced. It's subtle. It's almost something that can only be, I really believe, although somebody like a therapist like me has the capacity to see what you might not see because we're trained and we have a lot of experience and kind of seeing comments and behaviors as evidence of something that might be going on that you're not aware of. That's part of our skill set, right? To be able to see that and to bring it to your awareness. But the fact of the matter is, a healthy boundary really is something that is an internal thing. It's where it's coming from. When I set a boundary about a curfew that I believe is aimed at helping my child be safe, I am saying, here's what the boundary is. And here's the consequence either way. If you show up on time, here's the privilege. If you show up late, here's the consequence. And you get to be mad. You get to hate me for it. You get to disagree with it. You get to be upset or sad about it. I don't need you to be happy. So, in essence, I am taking care of myself because I'm saying, here's what I need as a father, as a parent. If you're not a father, as a parent, here's what I need to feel okay or safe because I have a responsibility. I have responsibilities in my job. I have boundaries at work about what employees are allowed to and not allowed to do. I have boundaries in my home. I have boundaries with my wife. But those boundaries are saying, this is what I need. In the long run, in the big picture, the underlying message that differentiates it from them taking care of us by complying versus what I'm suggesting is I say, you can do what you want. You can not eat your vegetables, your chicken. You can come home late. You can get an F in a class. To my wife, you can keep drinking or doing drugs or cheating or being, you can do what you want. But if you do, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I'm going to do. In addition, I'm not gonna pile on top of you a lot of emotional intensity. The simple example that I've told previously, it's a very trivial example. I say to my children, if you eat your vegetables and your chicken, you can have dessert, right? A typical thing a parent might say. That's a boundary. But when I start saying things like, don't you want to grow up and be big and strong? We have chocolate chip ice cream and brownies. Those are your favorite. Livy, V, Jake, Emma, eat your vegetables now. Right? I start to try to coerce them to get the outcome. I try to control the outcome. The other thing that I might say is listen to or go to 12-step meetings that focus on codependency. We ask all of our current parents to go to Al-Anon, Codependence Anonymous, Families Anonymous, or adultchildren.org, adult children on ACA. We ask all of our parents to try at least 6 of these because you'll start to hear people who have understood this distinction. Folks in recovery for codependency, which is a pop psychology phrase, term, word for problems in relationships, basically. Folks in recovery for codependency are better at boundaries. They're more clear. They know that their serenity is, there's a saying in Al-Anon that says, my serenity is my responsibility. Yeah, I've said to my daughter, my 4th child, I think I've shared this on a broadcast. It can be taken out of context so easily, so I'm reluctant, but this is the truth. I said to her at the beginning of the school year, I don't want to fight. I don't want myself, my wife, to be looking at your grades online every day and micromanaging your grades. You're struggling. The pandemic was tough for you. You struggle with a few mental health symptoms, and I won't get into details about what those are right now. But I've seen them. We've talked about them. You've shared them with me. And I'm not going to wait until you're on an emergency room gurney for me to reprioritize what's important to me. And here's the fact of the matter. I said to her, my wife and I said to her at the beginning of the school year, you don't have to graduate from high school. In fact, you can take any day off of school that you want. And you don't have to make up an excuse. You just tell us you're not going to school today. There is a consequence around driving, a privilege around driving that has to do with grades. And we do drug testing. And there's some very clear, boundaries around that. But other than that, when you're 18, you're going to have to figure out how to make a living. And if you don't graduate from high school, you're going to have a few doors that aren't open to you. But I'm not going to sacrifice the relationship. I'm just not. I'm not going to lose the relationship and the connection because I want you to go down this one path. Now, my daughter is it's not just that she's an old soul. She's been around a lot of therapists for a lot of years. When we have discussions in front of her friends around psychological issues, she will say to me, Dad, my friends don't understand what you're saying. I do because I'm used to it, but they don't understand what you're saying. It doesn't make sense to them. She says that all the time. So that's our context. So we said, you don't have to graduate from high school. If you don't go, it's your choice. And at 18, we're going to have to figure out something for you to do. And we're not going to support you. We can't. I don't want to support you financially for the rest of your life, for the rest of my life. It's changed the entire dynamic in our family. It's not perfect, but her mental health has been better this year than it has for the past few years. She's happier. We're more connected. There's less stress. Not no stress. There's less stress. And she's gotten better grades this year than she's gotten in the past 5 years. Almost straight A's. And if I make the comment now, because it's been, 6-7 months since summer. If I make the comment now, you don't have to graduate from high school, she'll snap at me. And she'll say to me, Dad, I'm going to graduate from high school. And I'm going to go to college and probably graduate school too. Because I want what that life is. So I don't say it anymore. And I could give you stories about my 16-year-olds, something that I did back when he was, when my 30-year-old was 16, excuse me, when my 30-year-old was 16, 14 years ago. I can tell you the story about when I gave him back his marijuana that I found in his car when I was looking for a flashlight of mine that he borrowed. And I told him he might want to be careful because if he gets pulled over or get in trouble, I gave it back to him. I gave him a pipe with some paraphernalia back to him. I found a beer bottle in the trash can after I came home from a trip that none of the adults in the house didn't drink. And when I asked him about it, he denied it, and I said, "Okay," and walked away. And about 2 weeks later, and I'm not saying it was because of this, and I had the option in my back pocket, literally, not figuratively. I literally had a placement planned if things were gonna go awry and it was gonna get scary. I was ready to pull that trigger. I'd already sent him to Wilderness when he was 13 and aftercare after that. So I couldn't do that. But I wanted the connection to be there. I wanted not to be the hammer to his nail anymore. I wanted it to not be about good behavior and control. I'd given him a lot of therapy. I'd given him a lot of treatment. We had. And I wanted to try something different. My son got sober around a week or two after these discussions, these incidences that I'm describing. And he's been sober since. He's 30 years old. Just had his 30th birthday. I'm not telling you what to do. Please hear this. I hope I don't get emails to our webinar at evoketherapy.com from listeners who say, "Are you telling us that we should let our kids do drugs and drop out of high school?" And I'm not saying that. I'm saying there's no generic solution or technique. Like I said, the journey of the rogue parent. What was right for you this morning will be outdated by the afternoon. That's from James Hollis. Today's instruction is outdated by tomorrow. It's a living, breathing, organic process. Like one of the participants said and shared it with everybody, she realized this is not a one-stop thing. This is something that's a part of a practice and should feel good to us. Therapy should feel relieving. It's going to be confusing and hard and difficult and sometimes really, really painful because we're processing pain and grief. But we're not doing it alone. Somebody's there to carry part of it with us, to walk beside us. And the transformation that occurs in this work, that's still occurring in my life today. I would not have thought, I've said this before, to be clear about the education of my daughter, the high school boundary that I set or didn't for that matter. Just to be clear, I have a PhD. My wife has a master's degree. My daughter's finishing her dissertation and her PhD. Her fiance, same thing, finishing his PhD. My older son has a master's degree in organizational psychology. My son, who's 20, is getting a bachelor's degree at his college of choice, his university of choice, because his scores in high school were so exceptional. He was in the 99.7th percentile on his SAT and ACT. I value education. I think education is one of the things that can solve most of the world's problems. I really do. So I didn't compromise my values. I just thought it's not working. My pressure, my intensity, my wife's pressure and intensity and anxiety and the control that comes out of all of that, it's not helping them and it's not helping us and it's not helping the relationship. So I hope, again, I hope you hear the goal. I have therapists tell me sometimes when I talk about attachment-based ideas, like what I'm sharing with you right now. Kirk, you can submit the next question. I'll get to it in a moment. I have the experience of therapists saying to me, "Brad, people are coming to us for advice. People are coming to us to facilitate change in their children." And my response is, I know that. And I'm teaching you how it's done. If the other way worked, power and control, great. I'd support it. But this evoke way, this attach, and it's not evoke. This is this is not, and it's not modern psychotherapy, although modern psychologists and therapists have built upon the old models. This is attachment theory. This is psychodynamic, actually. This is Winnicott and Klein and Freud and Jung. Right? These are the masters. This is what they know. And some of the problem I have with specific modern theories in America is that doesn't do. That's a great tool, but Attachment is the thing. How the child feels about themselves, how they experience themselves, how they see themselves is a product of how we see them and feel about them. And if we don't handle our trauma, if we don't handle our needs and get them met somewhere else, like Carl Jung said, the great Carl Jung said, the greatest burden a child can carry is the unlived life of a parent. And that's not just a parent not living their dreams. That's a parent who's trying to live vicariously through the child. It's not your life. It's not. And I'm not advocating for passive parenting. The stuff that I'm describing took years for me to figure out and work through. I had to face tremendous amounts of fear and shame. I'm afraid of telling you about it right now. I'm afraid that people are going to quote me and say, this guy Brad's crazy. We got to find somebody who's playing the music that we want to hear. But I'm telling you, there's a different way to be. Like Einstein said when they attributed his science for the building of the atomic bomb, he said, you can't solve a problem in the same level of thinking that created the problem. You have to think differently. And that's what this is about. It's about transformation of consciousness. That's what our myths teach us about transformation, about rebirth. That's what the stories that we are attracted to in literature and in movies and in art are teaching. It's about transformation and new thinking. By the way, no parent and child has ever gone through what parents and children are going through today. And it's not just because of the pandemic, although the pandemic is a part of that. This is new for all of us. This is new for all of us. And parents have never had to make decisions in the context that you're having to make decisions. And let me say one last thing before I get to the next question. This is not about you figuring it out and getting it right. And I'm sorry if anything I say leads you to believe that. This is about you coming to terms with your own humanity. This is about you becoming human. I shared with the group that I saw this beautiful post where an interviewer asked a Native American elder, why do you use stories? Why do you teach stories? And the elder said to the interviewer, we teach it so that people can become human. And the interviewer said, but isn't everybody already human? And the elder said, some people never make it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what Rumi and Rilke were talking about. That's what Bob Dylan was talking about. That's what Picasso knew about, right? That's what Gandhi knew about. It's different. You have to unlearn what you've learned. You've adopted the fear and the control and the idea that you've been sold the idea, as have I, that the goal is to be right and good. And that teaching destroys us. That's what Jung meant when he said, I would rather be whole than good. That's what Jung meant when he said, if you want to understand somebody else's darkness, get to know your own. So I'll finish with this question. I know I won't have gotten to all of them because I'm so long-winded, Kirk, but we can save them for the next time. This last question for this evening. Do you have any advice or experience regarding ADHD and medications for ADHD? My son has the inattentive type and was diagnosed at age 12. He also has oppositional defiant disorder and is gifted. Ritalin slow relaxed didn't work, or Concerta. He was given a diagnosis code for moderate drug dependency in 2021 during wilderness evaluation. He always wanted to try Adderall, and he wanted to try less risky things. Since he's 18, he got it right away. We noticed how angry he got after it wore off. I recently read that now ADHD is called complex if there are at least more than one comorbidity, and if the child is diagnosed after 12 and meds don't work. Just wondering if Adderall is adding another challenge. You know, I don't have any specific advice around medications. I'm not a medical doctor, but it's trial and error. Every good psychiatrist that I've ever worked with will tell you that, and they will be humble about it. There's some great work. There's a a doctor in Houston, Jonathan, and I can't remember his name right now. If you email me, I will share his name and contact information with you. In fact, I might be able to look it up on my phone right now while I'm multitasking and share it with you. But they've done some great research where they're doing blood testing. It's not that expensive, actually. And not him, not him. I'll have to find it later. Um, they're doing fantastic genetic testing, and they're finding that they can increase the effectiveness of medication by an enormous factor, a really significant factor. So that's the only thing I might add to that. And just tell you, remember, just like my daughter potentially not waking up today, it's a human life. It's flawed and fallible and imperfect. And I'm going to end on this idea from Buddhism and Taoism. Suffering comes when we don't accept life as it is. Suffering comes because we're at war or at odds with the universe the way that it is. Enlightenment, on the other hand, essentially, simply, is not some blissful, gentle, nirvana-like glow. Enlightenment is accepting the world the way that it is. And that's not passiveness. That's understanding the way that it is. It's really understanding the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. A former wilderness client told me one time she got a new job after graduating high school. A really good job, and she was proud of herself and doing well. And she said one of the first things she did when she walked into her little tiny office the first day was she put up the serenity prayer. And she's not in recovery for drug abuse or addiction or any kind of program, but it's a reminder, it's a daily meditation about what it is. And so I don't have any specific answers. Go to the doctors. If you want to email me, webinar@evoketherapy.com. I'm happy to share the name of this doctor, a friend of mine, colleague of mine, who's doing great work in Houston with genetic testing that's really relatively inexpensive, not in the thousands, in the hundreds of dollars, and increases the effectiveness, the match for the specific medication that works with the specific diagnoses. I'm happy to share that with you. All right, folks, if there are any questions I didn't get to, we'll leave them over for next time. We're doing something new now. If you're watching live, or even if you watch on our YouTube channel, I'm going to be having the QR codes on some of the pages now. So if you want, you open your camera. If you don't know how to use a QR code, you open your camera on your phone. You simply point it at the QR code as if you're going to take a picture, and you'll see it'll a yellow outline and a yellow bar beneath. You click on that, and it will take you to the associated web page. So get your camera ready if you want. My two books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You, are available on Amazon and Audible. The QR code is there if you want to click on that. Our new programming on February 24th, I think we might have 2 spots left for the all-day conscious parenting workshop, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Mountain Time. That'll be led by me. It'll be a dialogue. It's limited to 24 people. I wanted to keep it small enough so that it could be a dialogue and not just another live broadcast like this. So we can even have some small sessions. I can do Q&A as we go along, and it'll be co-created by the audience and by myself. On May 26th at 9:30 to 4:30, I'll also be teaching a masterclass on attachment-based therapy. This is for therapists and therapeutic staff. I've had parents ask me if they can attend, and those that aren't therapists, you're welcome to attend if you would like. I'm just not going to make application to parenting. You're going to have to kind of do that on your own. I'm going to be teaching therapists and therapeutic staff about the therapeutic model and approach. And of course, I think there are wonderful applications to parenting, but you'll have to translate that yourself, generalize that yourself. On June 23rd through 25th, I'm going to be in the UK, outside of London, in a beautiful place where we've done it before for a Finding You weekend. So if you live in the UK, or we've had a couple of people reach out who are planning a trip around the intensive, you can come to the UK and spend a weekend with me, a Finding You weekend with me in a beautiful, beautiful home there. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. If you want to attend to Finding You, they're filling up faster than they used to. In fact, we might have to start doubling our offering, but we're not doing that yet. February may have a spot left. It was full, and then someone may have dropped out. I saw March is filling up, April's filling up. So if you're interested, click on the QR code there. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We also have an online offering. It's half the time, Friday to Sunday, so you don't have to miss work, and a third of the cost, and you don't have to travel. And it can give you a lot of the benefits of the Finding You. So we have an online offering, an in-person offering, and then of course we have custom Finding Connection for couples, private intensives, and Finding Family for families. So intensives at evoketherapy.com if you want more information. We have support groups for current and alumni wilderness families. The next offering is February 9th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Once a month, we have an alumni-only meeting for people that have a little bit more experience under the belt, a little bit more advanced. February 28th at 6:30 p.m. is our next alumni-only wilderness support group. We have an intensive support group every month for alumni of our intensive programs. February 14th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time is the next offering. There's a QR code for the webpage there. Contact Sarah D at evoketherapy.com or visit evoketherapy.com family involvement for more information on our support groups. If you want a coaching experience, this is for parents, couples, families, or individuals. We offer coaching services virtually all over the country. Therapists that are trained in attachment-based therapy. That is a beautiful new slide of our current therapists and coaches that are available for coaching. And I have on here anything from clarifying boundaries, parenting and family dynamics, wraparound services, reintegrating from treatment settings back to the home environment, couples, intimacy, codependency, on and on and on. Contact coaching at evoketherapy.com to get an Evoke Therapy coach that can work with the kind of model that I'm talking about this evening. If you would like to have a Pursuits adventure trip for a family or for young adults, these are customized trips, 3 to 30-day programs anywhere in the world. Southern Utah is a big adventure place. You can have some therapy and some fun. Think of therapy light. Think of sober fun. Think of it's a great mix for a family or young adults who want to do something fun, but also want something that is growth promoting, spiritual, psychological growth promoting. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for more information. We ask all current families to attend 6 12-step support groups, any combination of Al-Anon.org, CODA.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. Also, RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org, NAMI.org, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. All of these programs have free resources in your area, virtual, online, but also local chapters near where you live. You can find all these broadcasts on your favorite podcast app or Spotify. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcasts and listen and subscribe there. Or you can go to soundcloud.com on your computer. You can also watch the rebroadcast on Evoke's YouTube channel. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy, respectively. You can also find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. You can find us on Facebook by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives. And of course, our Evoke Therapy blog has new content each week. The QR code there will take you to a page having all the links for all these services. Our charitable partners, if you're interested in giving back and helping people that can't afford treatment, include ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and the EvokeFamilyFoundation.org. My next broadcast will be Thursday in 48 hours. I'm really looking forward to this, especially coming fresh off a couples workshop. I'm going to be talking about couples work. You don't have to be an alumni of a parent alumni of the Evoke Therapy Program, although I think it's really helpful because we find a lot of our couples issues are born that our children bear the weight of them, or our children do bear the weight of our healing and our unhealed trauma. So couples work for families, related to a child or not, will be this Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. I look forward to doing that. All right, folks. Thank you for attending. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. For and on behalf of the people that you love and the people that love you, thank you for attending and listening. And thank you for your willingness to do your work. The greatest way you can show your love toward those that you love and those that love you. Have a great evening. I'll see you in about 48 hours. Take care. Bye bye.